I am a 16-year-old boy. You know I'm 16 because it's May 26, 1828, and this letter says that I was born on April 30th, 1812. My mother is dead and my father was a Bavarian cavalryman. I only know a few words because I've spent my entire life trapped in a dark dungeon, subsisting on bread and water. Someone gave me 2 letters and dropped me off in Nuremberg for you to take care of me and to figure out who I even am. I'm gonna do my best to make sure society will spend at least the next 200 years figuring out what's true and what's not, why there were so many attempts on my life, and whether I'm a feral, neglected child worthy of your charity and pity, or whether I'm just a sociopath and a fraud. And if you're lucky, a scientific breakthrough in 2024 will make more progress towards solving my mystery than in the 2 centuries before combined. I am Kaspar Hauser, and the only hint I'll give you is to pay close attention to my underwear. In the April 1887 issue of Popular Science, M.G. Valbert wrote The History of a Delusion, a comprehensive overview of everything that humanity knew and didn't know about Kaspar Hauser more than 50 years after his death. The article leads with a reference to an 1838 French play called The Poor Idiot of the Cellar of Elberg, which reveals the European continent's absolute fascination with the Kaspar Hauser story. But I'll get back to the history of a delusion because the best place to start is actually a movie. Nearly 5 decades before he put a bounty on the head of a 50-year-old green alien baby, German filmmaker Werner Herzog chronicled one of the most famous and perplexing mysteries in his nation's history. His 1974 film, The Enigma of Kaspar Hauser, or the original German title of Every Man for Himself and God Against All, is the perfect retelling of Kaspar's story, because it's a mix of truth and lies reminiscent of the actual confusion over the real thing. For the first 16 years of his life, Kaspar had lived in a true dungeon, a dark cellar 2 meters long, 1 meter wide, and about 1.5 meters tall. He had a bed of straw to sleep on and a few wooden toys to play with. He survived on a diet of bread and water brought to him in the night by an unseen caretaker, and for most of his life, he had never even heard a human voice. Kaspar was a prisoner, and he had no idea why. But then a man came to visit Kaspar in his cell. It was the first human being he'd ever met. That man started teaching him. He showed him how to write by guiding his hand, and he lifted Kaspar up on his back to carry him away. For the very first time in his life, Kaspar tasted freedom. And the trip to wherever they were going was a crash course in socialization and humanity. The man had to give Kaspar lessons on how to walk, and it's a lot harder to teach a teenager how to walk than it is to teach a toddler. And he also taught Kaspar to repeat a single important sentence.
Sag mir das nach. Ich möchte ein solcher Reiter werden, wie mein Vater einer gewesen ist.
It isn't clear how many days and nights they walked together. 10? 100? But eventually Kaspar and his guide, or his captor, arrived in Nuremberg. The man stuffed a letter into Kaspar's hand and left him there alone. Kaspar looked awkward, disheveled, and barely able to speak at all. When anyone tried to ask his name or where he was from, he could only say 2 things. One was the line the mystery man had taught him to recite, and the other was,
Off.
He replied to every other inquiry with, don't know. Someone had noticed that the boy had a letter addressed to Captain Friedrich von Wessenig, an officer of the 6th Light Cavalry. It was anonymous, but it sounded like it was written by his captor. It said that Kaspar was put into my charge by his mother on the 7th of October 1812, and that the man never let him go away from my house, so that not a soul in the world knows where he has lived till now. The man ended the letter with a simple suggestion. If you don't want to keep him, kill him, or hang him up by the chimney. But in the real story, Kaspar was actually carrying 2 letters. The second letter was written by Hauser's mother and to his captor caretaker, confirming his birth date and explaining that Kaspar's cavalryman father was dead. It also said that Kaspar writes my handwriting exactly as I do. All right, wait. So, the bizarre child who can't speak, who learned to walk at age 16, and who was also dropped alone in Nuremberg by an unidentified man, is carrying 2 letters that appear to be written in the same handwriting, which coincidentally is exactly the same as Kaspar's own handwriting? Kaspar Hauser had been in Nuremberg for about 15 minutes before everyone had serious suspicions about this story. Captain von Wessenig did evaluate him and concluded that
Die geistige Bildung dieses Menschen ist in einem Zustand der totalen Verwahrlosung.
He could write his own name, but von Wessenig and the local authorities didn't find the letters compelling. They didn't see a troubled, inarticulate, helpless teenager. They saw a man with something to hide, so they locked him up.
Am besten wir lassen ihn vorerst in diesem Turm für Polizeisträflinge und Vagabunden.
At this point, you can imagine how quickly the news and rumors spread through Nuremberg about the young man in prison with nebulous origins and childlike innocence. None of it was making any sense, and it was impossible to tell whether Kaspar was dangerous or whether he was the charity case of the century. As he spent months in Nuremberg Castle, he was half prisoner and half public curiosity. People noticed that really nothing about him was normal, like how the idea of any new food seemed completely foreign to him. Just think about it. If you spent every day of your life waking up to the same serving of bread and water, how would you react to your first bowl of soup? And Kaspar's lack of general knowledge about life and even himself was so stark that he was learning about his own body parts from a boy half his age. But the strangest thing was that Kaspar seemed to have absolutely no sense of his own mortality.
Ich glaube nicht, dass das ein abgefeimter Betrüger ist. Hat ja offensichtlich keinerlei Begriff von Gefahr.
I mean, this entire situation is really interesting, and some of Kaspar's quirks are endearing and kind of cool. Valbert described him as the object of a lively curiosity, and the people loved him so much that he was formally adopted by the city of Nuremberg, with citizens volunteering to pay for his expenses and education. Kind of like a mascot or a town pet, which is weird, because it combined the psychological phenomenon of the savior complex with a form of benevolent social contagion into one city-wide movement to foster a teen whose story didn't add up at all. It kicked off what was to be a lifetime of self-appointed saviors coming to Kaspar's aid, and that's frighteningly common when it comes to vulnerable children. In 1725, Peter the Wild Boy was found living in the woods in Germany. In Feral Man in Extreme Isolation, Peter was described as peeling green sticks to chew the juice out of the bark. Britain's King George I was fascinated by the mute feral child who ran around on all fours, and he was appointed a sort of court jester who entertained the nobility with his unrefined behavior. Peter was turned into a spectacle under the guise of being rescued, and he served as a status symbol for his savior. And a few decades before Kaspar burst into Nuremberg, the 12-year-old Victor of Aveyron was found living naked in the woods. His rescue wasn't so exploitative. He was taken in by Jean-Marc Gaspard-Itard, who worked with a school for the deaf and who committed to teaching Victor language and behavioral skills. He was eventually able to wear clothes himself and respond to commands, but that's about it. Quick bit of trivia about Victor of Aveyron. Francois Truffaut's 1970 film about Victor called L'Enfant Sauvage also inspired my favorite Gojira album. Now you know that. Itard's linguistic studies made Victor's story famous enough that there was broad scientific and intellectual interest in feral, underdeveloped children for the next 200 years, including Jeannie, a California girl who was found in the 1970s, having lived most of her life secured to a chair in a bedroom. For years, linguists, psychologists, and researchers in childhood development tried to save Jeannie, who is considered at the time to be science's best hope to understand how language learning worked in the human brain. Because Peter and Victor and Jeannie and Kaspar are the sort of human blank slates that we never encounter, they are genuine examples of experiential and development deprivation. And it's so horribly unethical to create that situation that doing so is referred to as the forbidden experiment. There was no doubt that Peter, Victor, and Jeannie were all legitimately feral children, but Kaspar didn't crawl on all fours like Peter, he didn't run around naked like Victor, and he didn't have the distinctive bunny hop gait of a malnourished, non-ambulatory teen like Jeannie, or any of Jeannie's other problems. Kaspar was already a suspicious character, and then the teen who could recite one line and say horsey revealed himself to be a child genius. Friedrich Dahmer was a local teacher who regarded Kaspar as a prodigy. Under Dahmer's tutelage, Kaspar's speech improved to the point where he could engage in philosophical dialogue, and all of a sudden he had an incredible talent for art. Kaspar Hauser was on track to be everything Dahmer and all of Nuremberg hoped he could be. There were still skeptics, like the people who thought he couldn't possibly be more than a half-wild forest boy. But his sudden comfort with philosophy and art started to raise questions about whether he was actually royalty.
Es gibt auch Hinweise von den Bürgern, die sagen, sei ein Mitglied des badischen Fürstenhauses, das wegen der Erbfolge beiseite gebracht werden sollte.
As time went on, there were more and more signs pointing to the possibility that this rumor might just be true, that Kaspar was the true prince of Baden. The Grand Duchy of Baden was in the south of what is now Germany, and a few years after Kaspar seems to have been born, Baden had joined the German Confederation, which launched a Game of Thrones-like decade of political maneuvering and intrigue. Why couldn't Baden's true heir have been strategically erased to prevent his future ascendance? And for the most part, Kaspar seemed like such a nice boy, with talents that increased by the day. It had all the ingredients of a perfect conspiracy theory. And that was before Kaspar was found in Dahmer's cellar, bleeding from a wound in his forehead. Kaspar said that he was surprised in a closet by a black man who struck him in the forehead with a sharp instrument and went away saying, "You shall die before you go away from Nuremberg." And the craziest part is that Kaspar claimed that his attacker was the same man who delivered him from his cell to Nuremberg in the first place. A search party tried to find the man in black, but they came up empty. Kaspar was the only person who ever saw his would-be assassin. It fueled the speculation that Kaspar was Baden royalty who was saved from having been murdered as a toddler, and that someone, or a cabal of someones, was trying to finish the job. There were never any answers, and when the Hauser hullabaloo died down, Kaspar got a new savior, the British Count Stanhope, who said he wanted to take upon himself the future care of him.
Darf ich Ihnen meinen jungen Schützling Kaspar?
Stanhope didn't just want to continue Kaspar's development, he also wanted to solve the mystery of his past. so he took Kaspar to live with him in Ansbach, where he continued his studies under Johann Georg Meyer. It went well enough. Meyer was far more strict than Dahmer had been, and Kaspar caused him much annoyance. On December 14, 1833, just 5 years after he first appeared in Nuremberg, Kaspar had what would be his second and final encounter with the Man in Black. Kaspar was walking by himself in the public garden when the Man in Black appeared, and this time he presented him with a purse, and he was at the same time struck on the left side with a dagger. He staggered home with a deep wound in his chest. Inside the little purse was a note written backwards in mirror writing.
Der Hauser wird es euch ganz genau sagen können, wie ich aussehe und woher ich bin. Dem Hauser die Mühe zu sparen, will ich es aber selber sagen, woher ich gekommen bin. Ich will euch auch sogar meinen Namen sagen. Groß M, L, O.
In the film, the note is read by Dahmer, not Stanhope or Meyer, which is one more liberty Herzog took with the story. The assassin was once again nowhere to be found. The difference is this time, Kaspar wouldn't live to tell the tale. The stab wound was much, much worse than it seemed, and just 3 days later, Kaspar uttered his final words.
Ich bin jetzt müde.
And with his death at the age of 21, the Kaspar Hauser story was just beginning. If there had been speculation and rumors before, now it was the most intriguing soap opera in Europe. The facts and truths, the few things known for sure to be true, were also sometimes lost in translation, literally, between languages. And then when you take some artistic license in an oral story, a newspaper article, or 150 years later, a film, it's really hard to know what's real. Herzog's film is exceptional. The Guardian's Peter Bradshaw gave it 5 stars and called it bold and brilliant, citing its masterstroke of casting. Kaspar is played by Bruno S., whose actual name is Bruno Schleinstein. Herzog cast him as the lead despite Bruno having no acting experience at all. And remember when I said I was a 16-year-old boy? Well, that was a nod to Herzog, because when The Enigma of Kaspar Hauser was filmed, Bruno Schleinstein was 42 years old. So, yeah, it was a little tribute to Herzog when I claimed to be a 16-year-old boy to start this video. Herzog also injected a scene in which Kaspar is sold off to the local circus to help repay his debt to Nuremberg, which just...
Als nächstes Welträtsel und größtes aller Rätsel, meine Damen und Herren, Kaspar, der Findling.
Did not happen at all. But the most moving alteration Herzog made to Kaspar's story was his deathbed scene. I'm tired now is a gentle, poetic admission from a troubled boy finally entering peace after a life of confusion and terror. Kaspar's actual last words were almost incriminating. "Oh God, God, must I die thus in shame and disgrace?" Was Kaspar really the estranged heir to the Baden dynasty, or was he a sly vagrant boy who spun a web of lies to hoodwink thousands of people? It's almost a coin flip. Kaspar's birth in 1812 coincided with the death of Grand Duchess Stephanie of Baden's son. Was it a plot carried out by the Countess of Hochberg, the mother of the Grand Duke's brothers who were next in line for the throne after Stephanie's son, to eliminate the competition? The Countess would have been interested in his disappearance and could have caused him to be abducted to secure the succession for her sons. But that plot depends on the birth of a healthy son to Stephanie that was then swapped out for a dying infant to take his place. Then the Countess could have taken the real prince far away to be locked up where no one could ever find him. And then 16 years later, Kaspar appears in Nuremberg. According to Professor Dahmer, the real one, not the Herzog character, Every good German was bound to believe in the princely origin of Kaspar Hauser, and that one could not doubt it without making proof of rationalistic and satanic incredulity. And who could blame them? There was no sensible explanation for any element of Kaspar's story, not his lack of language, and certainly not the attempts on his life. So it made the unlikely explanation seem pretty likely. And Kaspar's death gave generations of skeptics a new life. The only real proof of his harrowing upbringing was his word alone. And out of all of his caretakers, from Dahmer all the way down to Meyer, everybody who had anything to do with Kaspar Hauser surprised him at some time or another in some flagrant lie. It started as soon as he was found. When police read the letters Kaspar carried and he saw that instead of being enrolled in the cavalry, they were taking him to prison, he made himself appear more simple-minded and silly than before. The charade continued when he could eventually tell the story of his captivity, after which he affected ignorance and wonder at everything. He marveled at the sun and the moon. He showed a belief that plants were man-made, and he spoke about himself in the third person. Maybe that's conceivable after 16 years locked in a room, but even Count Stanhope himself, who had loved him as a father, started getting so tired of his lies that he grew to mistrust him. And how does a boy who spent his life trapped in a cell have the skeletal-muscular wherewithal to trek for days, maybe even weeks, across the German countryside? If he'd quite literally never even stood up or walked, how did he have functioning muscles that could support his body? People who saw him come into Nuremberg said he looked well and had a good figure and the freedom of all his limbs. How does any of this make sense? None of this makes sense. And the most damning piece of evidence against Kaspar's innocence came from a counselor of police in Berlin who investigated his death. Merker believed that the assassin of Kaspar Hauser was Kaspar himself, that after waning interest in his story and growing estrangement from his adoptive father, Kaspar had ambushed himself to drum up a new wave of sympathy and intrigue. Merker was convinced that Kaspar mistakenly struck himself too hard and that his death was actually an accident. Had Kaspar's saga happened just a little bit later on humanity's march of scientific progress, we might know the full truth. So much of the speculation resulted from the science for any of this just not being known yet. Chronologically, society had a better shot to discover the truth than Wild Peter's or Victor of Aveyron's, but Kaspar's death came just before several breakthroughs in forensic science. Toxicology and pathology were just emerging as distinct fields in the early 1800s. At that time, forensic medicine was not divided into distinct disciplines at all, and it relied largely on various forms of pseudoscience to draw any conclusions. For Kaspar, this meant that most autopsies were performed by physicians without any special training, a fact that led to some inaccurate diagnoses on his own corpse. One of the physicians performing Kaspar's autopsy, Dr. Friedrich Wilhelm Heidenreich, seemed to note that part of Kaspar's brain was particularly small.
Andererseits besteht auch eine Deformität des Großhirns. Die linke Hemisphäre ist verkleinert.
Das erklärt vielleicht vieles.
Ich werde zu Protokoll geben, dass man an Hauser Deformationen entdeckt hat. Wir haben endlich für diesen befremdlichen Menschen eine Erklärung, wie man sie besser nicht finden tun kann.
Today, we'd be able to do something with this knowledge. We'd have a sense of how Kaspar's life was tied to his brain function and what could have caused his abnormal development. It may very well have backed up his story of a depraved upbringing, or offered clues to why he might have been a sociopathic fabulist. But this was the 1830s. Dr. Heidenreich was a firm believer in the pseudoscience of phrenology. The lead doctor on the autopsy, Dr. Albert, didn't find any brain deformities at all. And a number of overlooked forensics that we now take for granted would have helped us solve the criminal mysteries surrounding Kaspar, like forensic podiatry, which we just call footprints. In all the commotion with Kaspar's multiple attacks, you'd think someone would take a look at the ground. Was there one set of prints, just Kaspar's, or another set of prints for his attacker? Unfortunately, the first documented case of pedal evidence being used in a criminal investigation wasn't until 1862, 29 years after Kaspar's death. The more obvious evidence could have come from fingerprinting, but that was still in its infancy in early 19th century Europe. It wasn't until 1823 that Jan Evangelista Percagna was able to identify 9 fingerprint patterns, a very early and primitive manner of categorizing prints. And even later still, the first confirmed instance of fingerprints used in a criminal investigation occurred in 1892 in Necochea, Argentina, 59 years after Kaspar's death. The science just wasn't mature enough to give us any real answers. But now, we've finally uncovered a portion of the truth, and the secret was found in Kaspar's bloody underwear. In 1996, Der Spiegel was able to get their hands on a pair of Kaspar's underwear, likely from the Margrave Museum in Ansbach, that was stained with his 160-year-old blood. Pathologist Gottfried Weichhold dipped the undergarments into a solution of salts and enzymes to create a reddish solution that was full of Kaspar Hauser's DNA. Weichhold produced 50 DNA fragments from the bloodstain, an amount that was far below the detection threshold up to that point in time. Within those fragments were traces of genetic material DNA which only a mother can pass on to her children. These were compared with genes from female descendants in the direct line of Grand Duchess Stephanie of Baden, Kaspar's alleged royal mother. After over 2 centuries of speculation, we finally had the answer to whether Kaspar's body was pumping regal blood. Almost. In 2002, similar tests were conducted at the University of Münster in which Kaspar's hair and body cells were also analyzed. Of the 6 samples taken, all were found to be identical. They did not match, however, the sample from the 1996 blood test, which raised some eyebrows about the validity of that initial test. More than 20 years later, just a few months ago, testing that allowed for smaller fragments of DNA to be analyzed remedied that earlier scientific confusion. These advances meant they could analyze the DNA from hair strands individually instead of pooling samples, checking the sequences matched and improving the accuracy of the results. Researchers compared the data to Kaspar's blood sample and then to the mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down the mother's line, and finally concluded that he wasn't Baden royalty at all. Kaspar was just some kid. Does that solve the mystery of Kaspar Hauser? Not entirely. It just tells us what he wasn't. We don't know who he was or whether his origin story was true. We don't know if the man in black attacked him once, twice, or even existed at all. We don't know if Kaspar Hauser's serial lying was a sad boy's plea for attention or whether he was a mastermind of manipulation. If we'd had a single footprint photo, it could be posted on some subreddit that identifies shoe models and sizes, and it would probably be ID'd in 20 minutes. A modern autopsy would show what kind of blade was used to pierce Kaspar's chest, the angle of entry, the force that was used, whether it came from a left or right-handed attacker or from Kaspar himself. So we have to live with what still is a perpetual mystery of a feral boy who seemed to make miraculous progress before being targeted by a series of assassination attempts. We may not have all the answers, but Kaspar does have a legacy, ironically, in science. In what's known as a Kaspar Hauser experiment, a newborn individual is excluded immediately after birth from any contact with other members of its own species and is reared among members of another species, and then studied meticulously. We have films like Werner Herzog's, and Kaspar even shows up in unexpected places, like his 2011 Topps Allen and Ginter trading card in the World's Most Mysterious Figures series. But what we still don't have is answers. Maybe we'll have another surprise forensic advance in 20 more years. Maybe we'll find some ancient diary written in the Bavarian dialect that tells a credible Kaspar Hauser origin story. Who knows? It's frustrating, even more so than back in 1850 when we didn't know what we didn't know. Now we know what could have been and have a sense of what it might eventually be. Maybe. Because the truth is that we know so much more now that we actually seem to know even less. See you in the future.